There have been big revelations from America about the scale of the censorship complex that the EU's been operating, and the way in which the EU's been interfering quite to some degree effectively and certainly decisively in the case of Romania in various elections.
We've been vindicated. A lot of effort we've put with our work was to uncover the web of interconnected so-called NGOs, which actually are not just grassroots movements, organizations, but they are sponsored by the European Commission.
So what's happened is we have the highest labour costs in the world. We have the highest energy costs in the world. If you're a business, you pay taxes up the yazoo. If you're a person, you pay taxes up the yazoo. And somehow that's all collaborated together to form a place where we can't make anything in Europe anymore. So what's the solution? Is it to reduce energy costs? Is it to reduce labour costs? No. It's to regulate, to force people to buy European.
They've been very crafty at creating a narrative on the outside of Hungary. And I've also observed that with Poland.
They're chomping at the bit to get their hands on Hungary. And it is very, very clear that there is a large segment of the European apparatus here who want nothing more than to tear everything up about Hungary.
So hello and welcome back to the MCC Brussels podcast. As ever, I'm Jacob Reynolds. This week on the podcast, we're looking at the question of election interference, whether it's really America or the EU who's most involved. We're also going to ask the question, can anybody revive the struggling European economy? And we're going to look ahead to big election in Hungary and already signs that they want to implement a regime change playbook in Hungary. Joining me this week on the podcast, delighted to welcome a new guest to the podcast, a friend of MCC Brussels, Colin Allen, who's a lobbyist here in Brussels. Colin, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
We're delighted to have you. And welcome back to Agnieszka Kolak, our colleague.
Thank you for having me.
So kicking off this week with a question of election interference, there's been a lot of activity. We at MCC Brussels have just launched the Democracy Interference Observatory, which you'll hear more about soon. But the reason this is in the news is because there have been big revelations from America about the scale of the censorship complex that the EU's been operating, and the way in which the EU's been interfering quite to some degree effectively and certainly decisively in the case of Romania in various elections. Now, these revelations, rather than prompting any kind of hard thinking from the European side, have actually just been met with an election interference narrative of their own. So these American revelations are cast by the EU elite as American interference in sovereign European matters. Sarah Rogers, the State Department lady who's been all over the news recently and also just in Budapest, has been central to this. But Agnieszka, what have you made both of these claims and the counterclaims of interference?
I think, first of all, with the claims, we've been vindicated. A lot of effort we've put with our work was to uncover the web of interconnected so-called NGOs, which actually are not just grassroots movements, organizations, but they are sponsored by the European Commission. Then we also knew of the money coming from USA that was stopped, and then there were calls to try to match this funding from European Commission to save democracy in Europe, where you see this is controlled narrative and trying to preempt any kind of natural electorate movements from societies when they want to see a change. They want to see a political change, whether it's on migration, economy, Green Deal, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a great news for us to really see from the inside, from the documents released, from the emails, from the documents showing the meetings and particular cases, that yes, we were not paranoid. It wasn't just our narrative. Actually, there are proofs for that. And then the attack, straight away, the counterattack from the European side, it's quite interesting that this is the institutions, this is not the societies themselves. And it's a deflection tactic to try to turn it around and to try to spin it in a way for themselves to look good, to look as the adults in the room, the ones that are trying to just protect people, and so on and so forth. So for me, this is really troubling that that within the open public space, there is not enough scrutiny put into these documents and the mainstream media covering that for the societies to discuss it in the open public space and make their own minds up about that.
Connor, what have you made of this whole saga?
I mean, it's so very interesting, isn't it? And Agnieszka, you mentioned the situation of NGOs, and maybe some of the listeners, maybe some of the audience are not based in Brussels, but we here in Brussels, we see it all the time, every day. And isn't it funny how every single NGO seems to have the same opinion as the European Commission? And they seem to have a left-wing narrative and seem to have the omni-cause, right? And so I'm a lobbyist. I do a bit of media work. I go on a few debate shows with some of these professional NGO actors. And they transition seamlessly from environment to Gaza to human rights, so-called, to racial justice, so-called. And it's crazy to me. It's obvious that there is some sort of control, either by funding, either by trading, either by direct narrative. And it's so obvious for us to see here in Brussels. And not just the NGOs, by the way. You go to the media, right? How many Brussels influencers do you know? And they have exactly the same opinions as the European Commission. And a new topic comes up and it reads like a European Commission press release. The fact is, I think that the European Union is concerned that the narrative shifting, and they're starting to see exactly the same tools that they've used for 10 years being used against them now. It's just the fact that it's MAGA aligned. It's just the fact that it's coming from the United States, which is seen as a hostile actor now by some in Europe. That's the big issue. It's not the fact that Americans are funding. It's not the fact that certain NGOs are receiving funding. They always have for many years. Look at INI, look at NDI, look at USAID. Thousands of euros flowing in. The only difference is who is sending the money now.
Yeah, and I'm really interested, Agnieszka, in what you term this kind of deflection tactic, because it seems that there's a determined attempt, and we've noted many examples of this only in the week. You can check our X account for lots of these, but that already, rather than in many cases, the media, rather than even covering any of these stories, the significant revelations of how, for example, the European Commission was steering the so-called independent working groups that governed some of the legislation that the EU put in, rather than even reporting that, they immediately report these nasty Americans interfering in our elections. I'm really interested in the emergence of that kind of anti-American narrative, as it were. What do you make of it?
I think it's definitely political, and what I find quite troubling with that is that there is an attempt to, on one level, force this kind of independence, even if Europe is not ready for that. Also, the European Union seeing themselves as the only spokesperson for the European nations, the independent states. And I think there are different approaches to America as a country and Americans as a society based on different interests and history between the individual countries in Europe. And I find it quite dangerous that European Union would try to present themselves as a spokesperson for everyone. For myself, as a Polish person, I know that for Poland, this alliance has been very strong and very important, and we have no illusions about Western Europe defending us in case we were attacked militarily. And of course, we can have hard negotiations and so on and so forth, but it shouldn't be the European Union speaking for us and taking that stage. So I think this is important. And I think let's see how it's more political because it's a bit about attacking Trump, attacking his administration. If there was a different administration in power, they would be singing different songs from a different hymn sheaf.
Yeah, and I mean, this really intensified, Connor, as a year since now, to us famous, to others infamous J.D. Vance speech at the Munich Security Conference. That's happening again, kind of as we're speaking. But do you detect in Brussels the kind of renewed hostility to America, not just to Trump, but to kind of everything American?
It's not renewed, is it? It's more the voices that are pushing this narrative that America is our greatest enemy and we to a sovereign independence from the United States. It's the same people. They've always been like this. It's the same people you go back 10 years ago and it's a very strongly opinionated Frenchman going, no, we have to kick the Yankees out. Sorry for my accents. For maybe 10, 15, 20 years, we always have this sort of cultural smug superiority that comes from a very small amount of elites in Brussels, which is filtered down and it's kind of become the prevailing European narrative. But in fact, if you go to citizens, I was in Normandy a couple of years ago and they fly the American flag everywhere. They're very appreciative because people understand that France wouldn't be a country without the United States, without the sacrifices the United States make. You go to Poland, How many Polish people understand fully the tyranny of communist jackboots and appreciate and love the United States for their role in ending that? Does everybody, right? So what it is, it's just the current scenario. And because I think Trump loves Europe. I think he loves European civilization. And you mentioned the J.D. Vance speech. He's very open about it. They've seen a decline in Europe and they've seen us destroying our civilizations and they want to stop that. But the people who are destroying it take issue with that, obviously. And so it's just kind of unlocked something that was always there. It's not renewable. It's just come to the surface.
Yeah, well, I think it's a doubling down that we're seeing that's very convenient because these difficult questions that for the shame of many Europeans is like being raised by America, the fact that we have to get these revelations from America rather than this being a matter that Europeans can dig out. The European Commission has been so secretive with regards to a request from ordinary Europeans about how, for example, the DSA we're in a position only to hear it from America. And just because we're hearing it from people abroad, that seems to be an excuse to clamp down on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I also think that it's interesting that on one hand, they play this card that we want to be autonomous, Europe is strong enough, we just have to believe in ourselves, while they all run to China. So for me, this narrative as well doesn't add up really. And I think they, even with some of the voters across Europe, if they were winning the hearts with this narrative, I think there is a dissonance.
Yeah, it's absolutely it's the citizens versus the beat. It happens time and time again. And if you go to rural Spain, you're going to find someone who loves the United States, is fascinated by the United States. But you come to Brussels, and it's someone who they just want to. It's very interesting. You look, and we'll come on to the economy later, won't we? But when you look at what the French are doing, it's all about supplanting Washington. It's not about European sovereignty. It's not about anything like this. It's about putting Paris first, in many cases.
Yeah, well, I want to ask about that more directly at the end, because for you become one of the most hated men in European Twitter. But for
There's a lot on there, but
and of course, one of the things in the background of this, Agnieszka, is that there's like not only do they want to preserve the existing kind of censorship regime, but that we know their plans to even strengthen it. So is this like a convenient excuse for that?
Yes, they try to project themselves as this kind of, we have this higher values, European values. They don't really, really specify them, apart from the fact that they want to protect them. And the way to protect them is to make sure that they control what's being discussed online, what is proper information, what is disinformation, misinformation. And through this regulation, they're expanding that, and they're expanding it also that then to control the narrative in America and in other places around the world. And it's really interesting because, let's say, if they decided to put a firewall around Europe and say, okay, this is something like in the style of China, that we're going to just control what's being discussed on this continent, you could say, okay, fair enough. They just want to protect just this continent from anything that could be disturbing and potentially provoking critical thinking. But no, they want to expand it, and they play this kind of a good cop narrative around that.
Right, so turning next to the economy, this has been the talk of Brussels really this week. Major EU leaders are off in a typical EU-style retreat to a castle to go and plan how to save the European economy. We've heard lots about the kind of how to listen to the EU's god Mario Draghi, lots of talk of productivity. It feels like the same conversation that happens every couple of months, and it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, because there's many problems with the European economy, and the solution is somehow always we need more regulation, right? And so now I think the key thing with the economy is this made in Europe by Europe thing that's going on. And so what's happened is we have the highest labour costs in the world, historic highs. We have the highest energy costs in the world, historic highs. And we can't, if you're a business, you pay taxes up the yazoo. If you're a person, you pay taxes up the yazoo. And somehow that's all collaborated together to form a place where we can't make anything in Europe anymore. So what's the solution? Is it to reduce energy costs? Is it to reduce labour costs? No. It's to regulate, to force people to buy European, right? And so they have this thing they're working on now, the Industrial Accelerator Act. And it's gonna place these requirements. 70% of the components of your car are going to have to be made in Europe. It'd be devastating for supply chains. It increases costs. It forces companies to buy more expensive things. just that it's from Europe. Why is it always the state who has to come up with the answers? Why can't they just look at the free market, the most beautiful thing that's ever been created, and just let it off the hooks, let their economic motor churn?
Yeah, Agnieszka, this refusal to focus on fundamentals seems very characteristic of the as it were, the EU approach to rescuing the economy, because they do talk a lot about reducing regulations, and they kind of all sit there like in like a kind of struggle session about, oh, it's so difficult, we've got so many regulations, but they never like get to the actual bottom of it.
I think it's because this is baked into the system. So the EPP group, having this coalition with the highly ideological groupings in European Parliament, they have their hands tight, because if they want to abolish the Green Deal, if they want to cut all of this red tape, all of these regulations that create this bureaucracy and create this cost on top of the cost of the energy being so high and taxed and so on, they're not able to do that. But then they cannot go into coalition, into voting together with the right-wing bloc, because God forbid, this is cordon sanitaire, this is not allowed. They should punish the ones that are breaking away from that. So I think for the voters, they should really focus on what is being done instead of these words, because for me, it's more like marketing campaigns. Every year there is a new marketing campaign. One year you have a compass, another year you have all of the hoo-ha around the Draghi report, and people read it and almost, use it like a prayer book, but then nothing comes out of it, and we are all paying the price for it. Young people are leaving, so not only that you are regulated to death, and God forbid you die, and you don't dispose of yourself in a green way, then there's no young people to really innovate. And obviously you have to be risk-taking, you have to be bold and brave, and not just think about what I would be regulated and how would it end up, with my product, with my idea. You go somewhere else.
Yes. Can I just pick up on that and come in? Have you been to Dubai or Singapore or even the United States, which perhaps less attractive than Dubai and Singapore, but it's full of educated, smart, innovative Europeans who just need to escape this continent because you can't make any money. You want to open a business in Europe, good luck. Good luck. You go to Dubai, 48 hours and you're making 100k.
But yeah, there's the word that we hear versions of but never really get to the bottom of is productivity. That's the real thing that's at the heart of this crisis that Europe's in.
It's not the heart, but it's part of the heart, right? And the fact is, I hate to see, I see it all the time, Europeans praising the fact that they take 2 months holiday. I mean, we take August off as a holiday, a full month of the year. It's crazy to me. And okay, maybe you can say working norms in the United States, maybe there needs to be some cutback on that. No one wants to turn into Korea where you're working 90 hours a week. But if you look at the Europeans and you work in a 32-hour week, you have a 2-hour lunch break where you get drunk at the same time. It's really hard to see. You see the meme about Europeans saying, "Okay, I'm going on holiday. I'll return in 4.5 months."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't build an economy on that. Look at what China, Japan, Korea do, and you have dedicated people working, pushing themselves. They want to build the economy. They want to do that, and they want to provide for their families. In Europe, we just don't do that. Apart from the manufacturing sectors, white collar workers, we're very, very good at cutting the hours and reducing them. But the blue-collar workers in Europe, that's the backbone of the economy. They are productive. They're very good.
Yeah, it does seem to be an attitude thing. But there's also, as we said earlier, Agnieszka, there's these big things standing in the way, the huge amounts of regulation, the refusal to take energy seriously. We need to really break through on a couple of these issues, don't we?
Yes, I agree. But again, I would go back to the political side, that it's very difficult when the deals were made, and in order to keep the top of the elite in power, you cannot break through because they continue committing to these targets of net zero, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, and there seems to be no end to that.
Well, the net zero thing, there's such a disparity between net zero and the economic reality because they want to cut China out of the supply chain. Well, if you want to have a net zero decarbonised economy, you need China. But they want to have everything. They want to have decarbonisation, but done in Europe, again at the highest energy costs, again at the highest labour costs. So what gives? And the fact is they haven't worked it out yet.
Right. Lastly, coming to a theme that we're obviously very interested in at MCC Brussels, which is the upcoming Hungarian election. There's been a lot of news in this. I mean, people can follow this separately if they like, but some things really jumped out for me, which was the emergence of what you might call the attempt to do what I think we have termed the Poland playbook in regard to Hungary, the way that when the Law and Justice Party lost power, Tusk came to power again, there was this enormous wave of attacks on the media, attacks on the judiciary, and basically the opposition in Hungary have said, this is what we plan to do. They're saying it very much out loud. I guess, is this really the model now for any time they unseat a patriotic political party, they go for this kind of full takeover of the media, the institutions, everything?
I think this is definitely something they will attempt. I think Poland is quite an interesting case, and right-wing parties across Europe should study that, because definitely parts of it or the whole playbook might be used. I think in Poland, what was interesting was that before now the current coalition government got into power and it was the time of the elections, obviously the party that lost, Law and Justice Party, was aware that if they come to power, if Tusk comes to power, there might be, some kind of a witch hunt, court cases and so on. But they knew that they haven't done anything really like on the level of, I don't know, so illegal and so terrible that they will all end up in jail. And now we see it after 2 years that they didn't really manage to properly prosecute anyone. Everything seems to be falling apart, whatever case they follow through, because there's not much in there. So they were shocked what happened, how swift the move was. First of all, what was interesting is that all of this about rule of law and this conditionality on the money to be allocated to Poland, suddenly the money was thrown into the ring straight away after the election. There was no reforms done yet in judiciary. Nothing really happened. There was no procedure done, and part of the money was released, and there was this big op-ed with Tusk and von der Leyen and so on. So you look almost like a reward money for, well done, you won this election, now you are in power and we can move on. And then how swiftly they moved into the TV station. And okay, you can say that the previous TV station went the other way too much and it was not impartial and so on. But to send in the police to close down the place, and it was, I think, few days after they were sworn into power. So it was very swift move. Everyone was shocked and also quite worried, because they were part of archives that were deleted. It was not clear what's really happening in the building, and people were sacked from one day to another. And if that's something that they want to introduce in Hungary, then, I don't know. Good luck to this democracy moving along.
Yeah, well, the opposition in Hungary have said that explicitly that's their plan. Day one, they're going to close all of the media down because it doesn't represent their views. But Connor, what I said, we're going to be focusing on this as MCC Brussels, about looking into both election interference and the plans that EU-sponsored NGOs have to kind of try and remake Hungary should they manage to unseat Viktor Orban in the coming election. But what do you make of this as about this Poland playbook that could be applied?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you just mention the chomping at the bit to get their hands on Hungary, I mean, it's very, very clear that there is a large segment of the European apparatus here who want nothing more than to tear everything up about Hungary as it is now, whether rightly or wrongly. They want to tear it up and they want to do everything. So if the opposition party is given a chance to enact these so-called reforms, it will get carte blanche from the European Commission. It's quite easy to see. With regards to it being a Poland playbook, I don't want to say too much because, Agnieszka, you're Polish, you know so much more than me, but isn't it? It's a wider thing, isn't it? Because you look across Europe and our American friends have done very well in highlighting the crisis that's going on with European democracy. When you look across and you see Le Pen banned from running for president, when you look at the AfD in Germany and what's happening to them, if you look at what they almost did to Meloni in Italy, if you look at the BBC, another public broadcaster that has claims of impartiality around it, but that's okay because it's the other way. It's just all across Europe, we're seeing a huge dissatisfaction with the media because you can't trust it anymore. And I think Europeans are very smart and very clever. And if you look at the younger Europeans, they don't watch media anymore because of this. and you're more likely to go and watch Tucker Carlson if you're a young right-wing Hungarian now than you are to go and look at some of these public media. So it's a nuanced case, but it seems to me that it's almost a pragmatic effort to undermine democracies by any way possible to keep out them, I think.
Yeah, the point, Connor's point, Agnieszka, about them being desperate to get their hands on Hungary, any tricks, I think, are going to be on the table.
Yes, definitely. I think the media is the first point, but then it would be to try to dismantle any organizations, any think tanks, anything that is involved in education. And for me, it's quite fascinating, because if they claim that this is all about democracy, you are allowed to have different think tanks, different organizations, and so on. So what's the problem with that? So basically, through this, you see that this is all just about one-sided narrative, and they are desperate to get there. And also, they've been very crafty at creating a narrative on the outside of Hungary. And I've also observed that with Poland, when I was still living in Britain, how when Law and Justice Party won the election in 2015, how there was a concerted effort to present them in a very distorted way as some kind of deranged nationalist, almost fascist, where I knew the reality that a lot of the policies are, almost like socialist, in result, and that definitely, this is not what's being portrayed in the media.
Right. As in terms of a little bonus, while we got Connor here, I wanted to ask about this tweet that I referenced earlier, because Connor's become one of the most widely hated men on X over the last week, chiefly because he reported and had his own take on the news that the planned next generation fighter collaboration between France and Germany it seems decisively off now. Connor, just quickly, tell us what your take on this was, and explain, if you can, why this seemed to me it was the most controversial thing I saw on my timeline for some reason.
Sure. Well, I mean, just first of all, so everyone knows my biases, I am partly in the defence sector in my professional job. Essentially, the FCAS project is a Franco-German-Spanish consortium. It's designed to create the next generation fighter. America has one, Britain, Japan, and Italy also have a different one. The narrative you hear in Brussels is about European sovereignty and European, this is a European project. We don't need those bloody Americans. Except what's actually happened is what they're trying to do is replace Washington as the source with Paris as the source. And so you had the Germans and the Spanish, good faith, negotiating in good faith, and they came up against this French wall. They wanted to have all the manufacturing done in France and all the specifications done, defense specifications, design authority, labor sharing, everything done for the benefit of France. And then Germany and Spain, of course, you're going to walk away from that, because why bother to use all your taxpayer money to fund France? This upset other two French people who I discovered they can be very, very angry. That can defend. It was like Indian Twitter. You say something against the Indians, you're going to get a lot of hate. It's exactly the same. So my phone's actually buzzing as we're saying this with even more hate, but that's okay. We're British. We're born to annoy the French, aren't we?
Yeah, the thing is, tweet, we should put it up on the podcast. Well, I think it's up to something like 1 million impressions. That's an extraordinary. Every time I open Twitter, somebody else is having a go at Connor for being so anti-French. As you say, the lesson is you've got to have a thick skin if you want to needle the French. But that's definitely true of Connor. But right, that's all we have time for on the MCC Brussels podcast. As ever, if you like the podcast, please do share it with everyone you know. Give us a comment, give us a like, open another device and watch it again on YouTube. It'd really do a big number for us in helping to spread the message. We're having a lot of fun with the podcast and able to counter some of these EU disinformation narratives by putting these voices out there. So thank you so much for watching, and thanks so much to my guest, Agnieszka Kolek.
Thank you.
And thanks to Connor.
Thank you.